All right, welcome back, everybody, to the ATB NFL Live Show. As always, joining you on a Sunday afternoon. Unfortunately, our our third partner here, Zach, usually would be here. We assume, and maybe he'll show up at some point, that he might be sleeping right now. He has a really rough work schedule, so sometimes that can be something that happens to him. So we'll see if he shows up. But if not, we do have a guest here, Dalton Blackman, also with ATB, Raiders fan, I believe, right, Dalton?
Yep, Raiders guy. Yep.
Yeah, so we have him joining us today. We're going to talk the NFC South primarily, do some predictions on what we think is going to happen for that division. First division that we'll do. Every show for the next few weeks, especially, will be focused on each division, kind of give our predictions on that, talk about the teams. But first thing I want to talk about, unfortunately, this is something that I wish we didn't have to talk about, but I feel like we probably should. Over the last couple of days, Chris Sims specifically, I'm sure everybody knows him, whether they want to or not. I know, Tony, you said you kind of try to avoid him at this point, but he made a comment about the TuAnon situation, which we talked about in last episode, where the owner of that account unfortunately passed away, leaving behind his family, and they started a GoFundMe in his honor to try to help them out as they go through that situation. And on the PFT show that he does with Mike Florio, Chris Sims basically said that we're setting a bad example by sending money to someone who is very negative, which, first of all, someone on a social media account just messing around and trying to be like a fan of their quarterback or their team and like messing around with people is not necessarily one negative, and also definitely not something worth saying you shouldn't get money for your family when you pass away. Like, that's insane, right? Like, that's the main takeaway from that for me. But like, for him to say that on a show, to me, is just, one, irresponsible, and two, just kind of tells you what kind of person Chris Sims might be. Now, he ended up, I guess, giving $1,000 towards the cause, which is good, I guess. Obviously, I'm sure they'll take the money, but him saying that definitely kind of put him in a bad light, even more so for me, and not just because of I don't really care for his analysis, but as a person, kind of rubbed me the wrong way. But what do you think, Tony?
Yeah. So this topic, and then there were a couple topics last week. All of them, I ended up having to search the morning of the show because I was like, "Oh, something happened. I was unaware."
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that is that I'm pretty liberal with my block button, and if somebody is a football analyst on TV and shit, but they're not really talking football, they're just drumming up controversy, hot take artists, they get a quick block, and I just don't need that on my timeline. So I checked it out this morning. Yeah, he's an asshole. Don't say that stuff. I don't know. I'm happy that he's not on my timeline usually. Sad I had to see him today, but yeah, I don't know. Be better.
Yeah. Anything you wanted to add here, Dalton? I know you said you didn't really know about the situation either.
Yeah, I mean, just generally though, like this is who Chris Sims is, right? Like
seems like
gonna say the thing that people don't like for attention.
It sucks because like this is one thing where like even though it bothers me, and I know, Tony, you just talked about how you block a lot of people because of this type of thing, and I think rightfully so. There's a lot of people in the not just sports media but media in general who like to just kind of cause problems or say stuff that everyone knows is either not true or there's no reason to say it. They can't base it off of any analysis of any kind. And those guys are gonna it's gonna happen. You're gonna see that it works, unfortunately, and that's why they do it. If it didn't work, they wouldn't do it for the most part. But this is a different level. Like saying like if you want to say like Justin Fields is the best quarterback in the NFL, if you're a Bears fan, like that's stupid, but like it doesn't harm anything. It's just you're being weird, right? This is something where you're basically saying that someone shouldn't be getting money to their GoFundMe for their family because of how they acted towards you whenever it wasn't anything personal. It was like literally just them messing around and trolling about a quarterback for their team. Like that does not warrant any sort of conversation about whether or not they deserve money or they deserve their family to get money after they pass away. Like it just doesn't make sense, right? Like this is something you didn't have to do, you didn't have to say, and it didn't give you any positive attention. Sure, you got attention, and that's the goal, but you could have just avoided this. And I think that's the thing that really bugs me the most with it is like Sims is not great at what he does, in my opinion, but at least usually it's kind of just benign. It's like whatever, you can take it or leave it. This is something I think I really wish that he hadn't said, and then I'm sure he probably at this point hopefully wishes he hadn't said either. Probably based on that donation, I'm assuming he knows he was in the wrong. But wanted to start the show off with that just because, again, I think part of the reason why we like to do this is because I don't think, especially with us here, like we don't want to be Chris Sims, right? Like that's not the goal here. Like we don't want to have to rely on saying wild stuff just to be able to get by. So just wanted to start off the show with that. But getting into more important things, luckily, we're talking about the NFC South, which last year was just dreadful, obviously. Buccaneers won it by default, basically, by having the shell of Tom Brady and not being any of the other teams, basically. It's definitely things are going to change a little bit this year for sure. I will say, I think that the Bucks, as bad as they probably will be, they have some pieces still on from that team that could make them more interesting than I think people give them credit for. But they're definitely firmly in the position where they're going to be. Probably not repeating as division winners, but we'll talk about that more. Let's start with the Falcons. They were technically the last place team, if you want to call it that. Every team in the division except for the Bucks are 7-10, so they're all kind of in their own category of mid, basically. But I want to start with them because I think they are probably one of the more interesting teams in this division based on what they've done this offseason and what we kind of can expect from them. So I want to kick it off to Tony here first because he was pounding the table for the Falcons hardcore the last time we talked about them. Understandably so. I understand why he thought that. I want to start with you. What do you think about the Falcons in general for this season?
Yeah, I think it's awesome that we get to start off our division review series talking about the team that's going to be the first ever team to go 17-0. No, I am really high on the Falcons, though. I think that last year we saw that their rushing attack on offense specifically gives them a very high floor. I don't think the defense was that great game in and game out. They've made a lot of changes over there. Dean Pease no longer with the team. Ryan Nielsen in there now calling plays, and he's brought in a bunch of guys from the Saints that he has familiarity with. They need to beef up the edges to really run that defense, so that's a bit of a concern. But I think defensive line massively improved with David Adumana and Calais Campbell.
Yep.
That's the one. But the real story of the Falcons in 2023 is going to be their offense and their rushing attack specifically. They had an elite offensive line last year, just about any metric, especially when you're looking at run blocking metrics. And then they also have somebody who's in the conversation for top run game coordinator in the league. Arthur Smith, I know he has his faults. He has plenty of them, but that man knows how to scheme up run game, and he knows how to do it consistently with anybody. Drop in the best running back prospect we've seen in how many years, and it's going to be electric. I think what they were able to do on offense last year with Marcus Mariota, terrible QB, really dreadful. Like going from him to Desmond Ridder / Taylor Heineke, whoever you plug in there, is addition by subtraction. It's just putting a person in the room who's not going to mess up so often and is at least going to hit Kyle Pitts when he's wide open 40 yards down the field. I loved a lot what they did in like the draft and stuff. So strengths, say elite offensive line and rushing attack, and then just the offensive weapons in general with Kyle Pitts, Drake London. Both of them still look really good. I know last year was a down production year for Pitts. I said solid groups because I didn't want to say like, oh yeah, they have these strengths and then they have nothing else. So they're solid groups. I think like their interior defensive line is now firmly solid. I'm excited to see how they play. Their secondary, I think bringing in Jesse Bates, trading for Jeff Okudah, taking that shot. I think those are smart moves. And then linebacker, too. I think just bringing in Caden Ellis, solidifying the group there. And then weaknesses, the thing that could cause this to all come crashing down is the QB position, the most important position in football. A lot of people wanted them to be in Lamar. I wanted them to be in on Lamar, but that doesn't always happen. So they're rolling with last year's third-round pick and Desmond Ridder. Hopefully he takes a step. I think he can run that offense sufficiently, like a Ryan Tannehill type. But if that fails, then we know Taylor Heineke's got NFL ability. We know he can run an offense that isn't destined to finish last. So I think with all those improvements, they are going to be my pick to win this division. I think that they can comfortably get to 10 wins. I think it's a stretch, but you could see 11 or 12 if a couple bounces go their way. And I think their floor, because of that rushing attack, really, I think their floor is like 8 wins. So I have high hopes for the Falcons this year. I'm going to be rooting for them. Good job, Falcons. Great offseason.
Yeah. Before I jump into my stuff, anything you want to add to that, Dalton? Anything you want to say about the Falcons right now?
Yeah, so I think I'm a little higher on Desmond Ridder than most people. I had him as last year's draft. I had him as my QB1. I think, and that was also because that QB class wasn't great.
It's a really low bar to clear.
Yeah. But still, like, I think, like you mentioned, Tannehill, I think that's really where his ceiling's at, roughly. I think, Tannehill in his best years, I think that's Ritter's ceiling. where he can be a clear top 15 quarterback. I don't think he'll quite get there this year, but I think, he could be a top 20 guy in this league this year. And that's all they really need the way the offense is set up. They need someone to manage the ball. They got a great running game. I think the Bijan Robinson pick was perfect for what they're trying to do on offense. And also, I think with what they're doing with their receivers right now, I like the Mac Hollins pickup. He's a great possession receiver, and that's what they need. They need big bodies to, make a couple of catches and just to keep defenses honest. So I think with Hollins, with Kyle Pitts, I think they're set up well to control the ball. I think that's going to really mask a lot of their flaws on defense by just being able to possess the ball. And yeah, like you said, I think 8 wins, probably a decent floor for them. I don't have them as my top team, but I think they're the second best team in that division right now.
Yeah, I'm kind of in line for the most part with you guys. I think that the first thing you have to talk about the Falcons, like you said, is the floor, right? This team, the way they're set up, they're designed to basically churn out 8 or 9 wins by default, right? And that's without factoring in the quarterback play a ton, without factoring in the defense too much either. It's really about, can they control the football? Can they have really what's going to have to probably be a top 5 running game in the NFL? If they can do that, they're at least going to be able to churn out, like you said, 8 wins at least. I will say that my ceiling on this team is not quite as high as Tony had. I do see this, and I'll get into more specifically why, but I think this is an 8-9, 9-8 type of team. I think that they're going to be firmly in the middle pack of the NFL this year. They're going to get themselves to that baseline. And then what it comes down to is, can Desmond Ridder give them a reason to believe he'll be the quarterback after this year? I personally do not think so. I did have Ridder, I think, as quarterback 5 in this class last year. Was not a fan of him, still not. I mean, I haven't seen enough of him to really have a good idea of what he'll be in the NFL. But just going off of what I do know about him still and what I've seen from him, I do think he's going to hold this offense back if he's asked to win a game for them. Like, I don't think this is a guy that's going to win you any games by himself or by throwing the ball consistently, at least not this season. So I do think their ceiling, at least in year 2 with him, is a little bit capped. The receiving options are very good, or they should be, but we have seen Arthur Smith kind of struggle to build out a passing game that's effective outside of Tannehill that 1 year, really, mostly. We'll see if they can kind of get that offense going in the passing game enough to offset some of the stuff that might happen against certain teams in the run game, because as good as the run game can be, there's going to be weeks no matter who you play in the NFL where it just doesn't work, right? The blocking might not be good. The defensive line might be able to shut things down. And in those situations, can Desmond Ridder come out and throw the ball 35, 40 times, win you a game? I'm going to say no for right now. The defense, though, that's the thing that I think is going to, whether their floor is 8 wins or a little bit lower, is can the defense get up to that middle tier of NFL defenses with the addition of Jesse Bates, with Onyemata and Campbell coming in to solidify the defensive line. Because this pass rush, especially if Bud Dupree is as bad as he was last year, Ebiketie going to have like a crazy sophomore season as a pass rusher for them to be even sort of okay at edge rush, and that could cause them some issues against certain teams too. So ultimately,
don't sleep on Zach Harrison though. I think he's going to have early impact as a mid-round guy from this draft.
He's not, he'll be fine, but I do think that ultimately for me, with negatives especially, because I talked about some of their strengths already, at best, I think they're going to have the 3rd best quarterback in the division, and that's factoring Baker Mayfield being really bad still, which is probably what's going to happen. The weapons are either unproven or have been used improperly by Arthur Smith, in my opinion. And the secondary is likely to be volatile because outside of Terrell and Bates, there really isn't any premier guys who have had sustained success in the league in the secondary right now, so we'll see about that. And again, the edge rush, I think, is still probably going to be like a bottom 5, bottom 10 unit, which could be a problem. So I have them 8-9, 9-8, just missing out on a wild card, basically is where I have them at right now. So let's move on to the Saints. We're going to start, actually, Dalton, I want to start with you here because they have a particular player that you're very familiar with, we know, that I kind of want to get your thoughts on, not just him, but the Saints in general, with what you think they're doing. Tony and I are pretty much lockstep, I think, about the Saints, so that'll be fun to talk about when we get to our chance here, but I want to start with your thoughts on the Saints.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think the Saints are the best team in this division, basically because they have by far the best quarterback in this division. I mean, Derek Carr, yeah, not a great year last year. I think that says more about McDaniels than it does, Josh McDaniels than it does about him. And I think it's going to be really interesting. I think those of us in Raider world, we're finally going to get to really settle the debate once and for all.
I know it's been a big one, so yeah.
Where is Derek Carr? Who really is Derek Carr? What does he look like with a competent defense? And that's the biggest thing. This is the first time in Derek Carr's entire career where he is not going to be playing with a bottom 10 defense, really. Pretty much, anyways. I mean, there was, I think, 2016.
2016 was that year where I think everything kind of came together until his back
defense was average.
So. Yeah, they were at least all right. Yeah, so.
Yeah. So I think it's going to be really interesting. I think they're set up well. They have weapons for him. I think he's going to. I think he's going to really do some good things. A guy to watch out for on that Saints team this year, with the addition of Derek Carr, Juwan Johnson. Big-bodied athlete. That's the kind of target that Carr likes. And every year in Carr's career, some no-name receiver comes out of the woodwork to be his favorite target. I mean, look what he did with Matt Collins last year. We saw it with Nelson Aguilar, Zay Jones. I mean, there's a pretty long track record of it. And I think it's going to be interesting. I think their like I said, that defense is going to do one of the things that specifically Raiders defenses never did with Carr is generate sacks and turnovers. The Saints defense can do that. They can actually get teams off the field. And I think that's going to be a huge thing. And yeah, I think they're just set up really well for what they're going to want to do this year. I think their floor is 10 wins. And honestly, that's enough to win that division. Yeah, 10-7 probably wins that division.
I do kind of agree with that. Yeah, with the division. So I'll start off here. So with the Saints, they're kind of by default my pick to win the division too, but mostly based on schedule and the fact that also, like you said with Derek Carr, like I don't really know where I'm willing to rank Derek Carr at this point, but I know that going into the season at least, we'll see what happens with, obviously Ritter to a certain degree because there's unknown there, and obviously Bryce Young as well, who we'll talk about with the next team. He firmly is the best quarterback in the division at this particular moment from what we know. That is a big deal in a division that is not good, right? It just is. And especially for a Saints team that they've done everything they can to try to stay competitive, and I think that ultimately it's going to eventually fall apart. I just don't know if it's going to be this year with an NFC that's still relatively weak and a division that is very much still relatively weak. So I will start with that. But as far as strengths, their secondary is still very strong, I think. Obviously, Marshall Lattimore back there, still one of the better corners in the NFL. We'll see how that secondary can keep playing. Quarterback, again, I'm putting as a strength, especially relative to the division. Linebacker, I still like Demario Davis, what he's been able to do even at his advanced age. Pete Werner, very good player as well. Really like that. Weakness, I will say receiver after Olave, especially if Michael Thomas continues to just not exist, is a little bit of a question mark. But again, Derek has not always had, outside of whenever he had Devonta Adams and Darren Waller, like never had like a elite group of receivers outside of those two, in my opinion. So he's been able to play well without having that. And Olave was really, really good as a rookie. Like, he was a very good player. He could definitely be the number one on this team, and it isn't a problem by any means. You talked about Juwan Johnson. I am kind of higher on him than most people as well. I really like what he does as a tight end. He's definitely one of those classic move tight end players, which I think he's going to do really well for them there. Left side of the offensive line is something that I am concerned about. Andrews Pete is not a good guard at this point, and I don't know what to expect from Trevor Penning. That could be something that could limit this team a little bit offensively if they really can't protect him from that side at all. And I think that is something you have to think about. A couple other things. The Kamara situation, what is that going to be? I don't think we have any clarity on that quite yet, unless I missed it. So that could be an issue. Obviously, they brought in Jamal Williams, who's a great goal line back, but I don't think he's going to replicate anything Kamara really does regularly, obviously. We'll see if maybe the rookie from TCU, I can't remember his name right now, if he maybe
Kendre Miller.
Miller, yeah. If he can come in and kind of replicate some of what Kamara did as well, if need be. The turnover, their D-line, they brought in a lot of bodies, but they're not great necessarily. Kalen Saunders, I know, is brought in. Someone else I can't remember the name of. Obviously, they drafted Brian Brzee, but I think he's going to be a guy that takes a little bit of time to get going. So see how that goes. Overall, I do like the team. I think they're a veteran team. They still have a really good defense. I do think so. I don't know if they're going to be quite as good as they've been in the past, but at least be up there, especially in this division. I do have their floor as like 9-8, 10-7. I think that they could go as high as 11-6 with their schedule. It's just not very hard in general. And I think that'll be enough to win them the division, even if they might not look like the best team in the division a lot of the time this year. I think that they'll be able to eke out enough wins to kind of come out on top. But what do you think, Tony?
Yeah, I definitely am much lower on the Saints than you two. I still think that they are deservedly the odds-on favorite to win the division. Won't argue that they should based off of how things look right now. I think their build is pretty fragile, and I don't think that they have like the X factor that's going to be necessary when things break down a little bit.
I think Jeff here is right in lockstep with you. There's a lot of boomer bust potential here.
Hey, Jeff.
Yeah.
I like that. That's exactly where I'm going with it.
Yeah.
It's so when I look at what I think for a team's floor, the first place I go is the trenches, specifically offensive line and what they do with it, and then also the defensive line, what they can do with that. And that's the biggest weak points of this team, both sides of the ball, really. Their offensive line, I think, has the potential to be an absolute disaster.
Ramchick is kind of holding that thing together right now. So.
They have one player that I am comfortable saying, yeah, he's going to have a good year.
Is a true plus starter. Yeah.
The rest of them, they could. I mean, they're not good players based off of recent history. And yeah, they could all have career years or something. But like, I don't know. It seems fragile to me on the offensive line. And Derek Carr, great quarterback when he has time and everything. But if he's under constant pressure, and the fact that the weapons aren't super strong, that has me a little bit worried about how that marriage is going to go early on. I think having Chris Olave is going to be it's going to be reminiscent, I think, of like him just chucking it deep in the face of Engage 8 to Henry Ruggs. Like I think that's kind of what it's going to have to be. He's going to be like, yeah, you can run really fast and get downfield. I'm going to have to throw stuff to you. Same thing with like a guy like Rashid Shaheed. Dalton, I think you're onto something with Jawan Johnson. I think he's gonna like potentially be kind of like their X, like their traditional X. Let Olave play the Z. Like I think they're gonna get creative with that, and that is kind of an X factor to look out for. On defense, I agree. Their secondary is awesome. Their linebacking core they're intelligent. They're always in the right place. They don't overcommit. It's an impressive back seven. The front. I'm worried. They've lost so many players. Too. Like they lost Shai Tuttle, they lost David Onyemata, they lost Marcus Davenport. I'm sure they lost a couple others, but like Cameron Jordan and Carl Granderson, great starting duo. You hope that Foskey is going to be good early on because he's going to have to be. And then same thing on the interior, like Brian Brzee is going to have to be ready, and that's a guy who everybody thought was going to take some time. So I'm concerned about what that looks like in this division with a bunch of good rushing attacks, good offensive line, or two good offensive lines. There are worries for me so I don't think they have a 10-win floor. I think they have a 10-11 win ceiling, and I think they're the most likely team of all the teams to hit their ceiling. I don't have a lot of great feelings about the team. So they're probably going to end up winning the division. They have a super, super easy schedule, but nothing about the Saints gets me feeling good.
Well, that's kind of my thing, too, is like I'm going to pick them to win the division is mostly because I think that they are the best combination of a veteran team that also has enough actual talent for that to matter, right? Because the Bucs are also a veteran team, but we're not going to be picking them to win the division. So there's a difference there, right? So I think that for the Saints, it's all about...
The difference is called Derek Carr.
Right, pretty much, yeah. But when you have to look at that team and go, okay, they're obviously trying to win this division. That's important to them that they stay competitive. They did everything they could to continue that competitiveness. I think it will work for at least this year. Past this year is where you start to get tricky, but you also have to understand this is a division that is not exactly putting the bar very high. So for them to win the division, they don't even have to really be good. They just have to be good enough to win some of these games that they're clearly going to be favored in based on their schedule. So we'll see how that goes. But again, I think that we're kind of all on the same page of like the Saints are the favorites for a reason, but there is potential for that to all come crashing down. I just think it might be next year that happens. But let's start with let's go to the Panthers now. So I want to start off here because I was obviously the one that was kind of pounding the table for them, and kind of similar to Tony, where like he doesn't have the Falcons quite in the upper echelon of teams that kind of sounded like he might put them in before. I did cool on the Panthers a slight bit, just enough to kind of have them and the Falcons almost in the same basic tier for just different reasons. So let me start with the strengths for them. I think that their young defensive core is a really big deal. They really played well last year. I think they're only going to play better. That team on defense is kind of going to be their identity, I think, for this season, especially the offensive line really gelled late in the season. I think that that's going to continue to happen. I think that they're going to be able to run the ball effectively and pass protect effectively as well. So it's going to give a new quarterback, who I think could end up being a strength at some point during the season, Bryce Young, hopefully plenty of time to see the field, to make things happen with a receiving core that I will say I kind of put in like they're not a weakness, but it's not a strength. They're very mid is how I would say it. All the receivers,
perfect word.
Yeah. All the receivers, like the first 5 receivers on their depth chart, I think can all play football. It's at this point still. Is it going to be great? Probably not, but I think all of them are capable receivers in different ways. So I think that together they can hopefully form a competent receiving core, which is really the goal for year one for Bryce Young. So I think they'll be fine. It just won't be a strength. The pass rush lacks depth for sure, outside of Brian Burns, and then you hope that a jump can happen for Gross Matos on the other side. Frankie Louvu is kind of a weird hybrid player, but he's a good pass rusher when they ask him to, so that's kind of iffy. But the pass rush in general is a little bit shaky and also just doesn't have a lot of depth. How good is Young in year one? I think that's really the thing that's going to separate this team from being similar to last year versus competing for the division. Is how good can he be in year one? I do have a higher view of him than I think a lot of people do as a year one player, especially. I'm just looking at the way the Panthers are set up. I think he's at least not going to be destroyed at any point. I think he's going to be able to kind of show the things that made him the first overall pick, and that might be good enough to make this team, 8, 9, 10 win team. In general, I do think they are still, and actually Jeff just threw us in here a comment here, they probably are a year away. That's kind of where I'm at with them as well. I think that they're a well-rounded team. There's really no glaring issues with them at this point. But I do think the Saints, kind of like we talked about, they just have a little bit higher of a ceiling because they have an established quarterback. They have a veteran defense. They have certain things in place that probably won't keep them from at least winning enough games to win the division. Some of the things I wanted to mention with them still too is, can the defense take a monstrous leap, right? Because if that happens, all bets are out the window. Because I think if you give Bryce Young, and even as a rookie, a really great defense around him, it'll give him a little bit more leeway to kind of try to make more plays and not have to just manage the game and try to win 8, 9 games. So overall, I do have them as like an 8, 9, 9, and 8 type of team. I think they'll be a wild card contender, kind of like the Falcons, the same vein of they're in the mid tier of the NFL, and we'll see kind of what they do in year 2. But what do you think, Tony?
Yeah, I definitely agree with the sentiment that they are a team trending in the right direction, that I expect to have a pretty good year next year. This year, I think they're going to be figuring some things out. There's a whole lot of newness there. It's good newness. It is replacing bad with good, but with anything that new, with that much turnover on a roster and that much turnover in a coaching staff, nothing's guaranteed to oil well early on. So I'm a bit worried about the time to really gel and how that plays into this season. I do think Bryce Young is in the best environment of any of the rookies. We've talked about that on previous shows. They've built the house around him pretty well. They've got solid running backs and a solid offensive line with upside. Like Ike Ekwonu, he can take a step into stardom, and that would be massive for the team. Their receivers, like you said, are sufficient, not exciting. That there's a lot in place. Like even the backup quarterback position, having Andy Dalton there, having Josh McCown as a coach in the room, having Frank Reich as a coach in the they've got a lot of good things around him. But I do think that offense is going to take a minute to get going. I think they're going to have some games where they're putting up 3 to 7 points and feeling a little bad about it. Defensively, I'm super excited for this team. And preface, I live in Charlotte. I'm probably going to try to get to a few Panthers games because they're finally going to be exciting. But this defense is going to be the real deal. I think they played very well last year. They're bringing in Ejiro Evero, one of the best defensive coordinators in the league. The personnel is already pretty standard for his scheme. I think it's going to flow pretty nicely. Frankie Louvu, you brought him up. Man, he's fun. He's a really fun watch.
He's one of the true like hybrid linebackers in the league that actually work. Because we hear about all these like, oh, this guy can play a little bit of everything, but like he actually does it. Like he's actually the example of it in the league. So
yeah, he's a fun guy. The defensive line, bringing in Shy Tuttle, I love. Derek Brown has a chance to step into something like he can. I was just saying with Ike Ekwonu, he can step in to be a star. Like Derek Brown can do the same, and then they'd be crazy good.
Oh, yeah.
Brian Burns has already arrived. Yetur Gross-Matos, he knows one thing and he knows it well. And don't ask him to be a well-rounded edge rusher, but he can power you.
He can bull rush. Yeah.
So I think this team has a very wide range of outcomes. This might have the widest range of outcomes in the division. Yeah. I could see them going, I could see them the traditional first-year quarterback, like 5 or 6 win team, but feeling good about the next year. I could see that. I could also see them just stealing a few wins and getting to that 10-win mark. I don't think that's very likely, but they're going to be a very fun team to follow. I think ultimately I'll project them around the 7-10 mark and missing out on some stuff, but I like what they're building, and I'm very excited about what year 2 of the Frank Reich tenure would look like with Bryce Young in there knowing the system longer.
Yeah, anything you want to add to the Panthers, Dalton?
Yeah, so I think you guys kind of hit a lot of the main points. I'm in pretty much agreement. The defense is really solid. Especially that front seven. That front seven is something else.
They're fun. Shy Thompson was really great last year too. So.
Yeah, and you mentioned Shy Tuttle. I think that's a really good pickup. Yeah. And then offensively, the way they're set up, though, it is. I think Bryce Young's in a good situation, but he's going to have to do a lot to really elevate them. I think you look at the talent on that team, 5 or 6 win team, that if Bryce Young played out of his mind, he could elevate them to a middle of the pack team. However, like, God forbid, I mean, you look at his size, you got to wonder if he gets hurt for a few games, what does that team really look like with Andy Dalton at quarterback? I mean,
it's
oddly they look kind of like last year's Saints.
Yeah,
right?
they'll be
Andy Dalton at quarterback and just mid everywhere else.
They'll just be fine. Yeah, it's tough. I think the thing with Bryce and I talked about is like, again, I'm very high on him even as a rookie. I will say that there is potential because of the fact that there is nothing special about the offense right now. Right, there is a potential that he just is asked to do more than he's capable of as a rookie, and it does look bad at times. That's definitely just kind of what happens with most rookie quarterbacks. Yeah. But I think he is uniquely under control as a player where I don't expect it to be too much for him. I just think that maybe it just won't work regardless of whether he plays well or not. Like it just might not happen for him in year 1. That's where you can see them kind of not bottom out, but fall into that, like you said, Tony, like 5, 6, win team. I do feel more, like I said, them and the Falcons for different reasons, I feel are the mid-tier of this division for sure. Where like both of them are probably closer to a 500 team realistically, but different things could happen to put them below or above that. They're just for different reasons, right? So they're kind of the mid tier. The Saints are the team again that we think will probably win it just kind of by default. Now let's talk about the team that
I messed up. So, I would be remiss if I passed up an opportunity to talk about my guy Jonathan Mingo. If we're talking Carolina Panthers,
yes,
he's the real X factor. Yeah, Derek Brown, Ike Ekwonu, they can take their steps. Jonathan Mingo, you get him an AJ Brown rookie season, and we're rolling.
I want to see him play a lot as a rookie. I do. We'll see what happens because their receiving core is
he won't play a lot as a rookie. But I want to see.
I want to see him. I mean, DJ Chark gets injured or something, or Adam Thielen's bad or whatever. Yeah, you can get in there, but we'll see. But now let's talk about the team that I think a lot of people want to talk about the most because we're just curious how bad it could end up being. The Buccaneers. So the division winners last year, and Tom Brady's last year, very unceremoniously sent out of the NFL, which is something I never thought would happen, but it is what it is. So this team is very weird to me. So I do think they're going to be one of the worst teams in the league record-wise for sure. But they do have a lot of veterans on defense, especially. Their secondary is very strong in general, especially the starters. The issue is I think one person gets hurt on that secondary. I don't know who's coming in. I looked at their depth. I don't know who steps in it any position on the secondary if one guy gets hurt. Like that's kind of where they're at right now. I don't know if they're going to try to add bodies or something. Maybe they'll add some guys, whenever cuts happen or whatever. But their depth outside of their starters or projected starters is interesting with a couple positions. But let's start with their strengths. Defensive coaching is kind of their main thing. Todd Bowles, even though I think he should be a defensive coordinator, clearly from what we've seen, he is a good defensive coach, so you get a plus there. Starting secondary, like I said, very strong. Receiver duo is very nice, of course. We'll see if it matters or not with that offense. And I think linebacker with Levante David's still one of the most underrated players. Devin White doing Devin White stuff, which is sometimes good, sometimes bad. I think that's a pretty good strength of the team as well. Weaknesses with them, pass rush, if Shaq Barrett doesn't return to form, is really in a rough spot. It's bad. It's not going to be good. I think it's why they drafted who they did in the first round, but I think that was a mistake considering where they're at as a team. I like Bud Fancy, but kind of interesting choice there with the first round pick. Depth in general is just kind of in a rough spot. You can kind of tell that they're not trying super hard to be in position to win if anything goes wrong. It's kind of just like we'll throw it out there and see what happens. And then the running game. I don't know what to make of their running game because Rachaad White I like as a player in general. I don't think he should be getting 10 plus carries a game, which someone has to theoretically, probably. So we'll see what happens there. In general, I just think this team lacks a lot of the things you need to even field a competent roster, like a competent, like winning team. And then, of course, we can talk about Baker Mayfield being probably the quarterback, right? As much as I don't really care for him anymore, I hope he is the quarterback because I do not want to watch. I do not want to watch Kyle Trask this year. Listen, that second round pick of Kyle Trask still bothers me. I don't know if that bothers anybody else. It's something that doesn't matter, but it just I'm like, you really thought
it better bother them. They didn't even choose to play him in they played Blaine Gabbert over him.
Yeah.
Like they must be bothered by this.
It's really rough. It's for me, like Baker Mayfield. He had the one game for the Rams last year that was very fun, cool story. But I just don't know if you're going to get starting quarterback play from him anymore. Like if they do, then this changes their outlook a little bit. I think it puts them into like that lower mid tier of teams opposed to really the lower end of teams. The other problem is their offensive line outside of Tristan Wirfs is just question marks after question marks. Like Ryan Jensen coming off of major injury last year did not look good in the one game he played in the wild card, but he was probably getting rushed back, so it's hard to say if he was even really ready to play. He's only getting older. They're going to more of a wide zone running game, from what I understand, which is not the best fit for most of the guys they have, in my opinion. Wirfs is going to have to play left tackle and is going to have Tom Brady getting the ball out every 2 seconds, which I'm not saying that that's why Wirfs is good, but I think it is going to change his overall level of play a little bit just because he is going to have to handle blocking a little bit more. And I think that moving to the left side is never easy for most guys. Not projecting him to be bad by any means, but I think it is going to kind of I don't think he's going to be as good of a left tackle compared to the rest of the league as he was as a right tackle. It's just hard to ask anybody to do that. There's just so many things that you look at this team and you're like, man, this could really easily just bottom out. It really, really easily could, especially if some of the veterans do start to show their age. So let's go to Tony here. What do you think about him?
Yeah, I think he had nailed it. This is a team that there's not a lot of positives to talk about, unless you want to just talk about past history, because I think that's what they're doing. But the upside case, I guess, is just that, like you said, the defense on paper can be elite, and they have good defensive coaching. I think the secondary is one of the best secondaries in the league if you ignore the depth, like you had said. Right. And it felt weird. Just overall, this offseason felt weird for them because this is a team that should be rebuilding, right? They went all in on the veteran quarterback. They won the Super Bowl with the veteran quarterback. They, dying days, they made the playoffs. Now it's time to just start the rebuild. Just set it up. And they they lost a lot of players. They traded away Shaq Mason for some reason. But then they signed Jamel Dean to a massive contract. They sign Levante David, not to a massive contract, but they retained Levante David. Yeah, just
let him finish his career probably with them. Yeah.
They draft a very situational, rotational pass rusher whose size we've never really seen work. they seem like a team without a direction, and this was the offseason to really jumpstart the rebuild. So the upside case is just that the offensive line somehow pieces it together. I don't think changing positions for Tristan Wirfs is good, but they somehow get to like average or slightly below average, and then Baker just decides to chuck it to Mike Evans and Chris Godwin every single play. And then the defense, does what we expect the defense to do, which is be all right. That's really the only way I see them getting over even like 5 wins, because this is a roster that can contend for the number 1 overall pick, and that's probably where they should want to be. To just drop Caleb Williams into it next year, it fixes all problems. I think it'll be really interesting to see if they trade Devin White before the season starts. I know that's been rumored. I personally don't think Devin White is a very good player. If you can turn him into picks, that's awesome for a team on the rebuild.
He's at least a limited player, I think is the best way to describe it.
Yes, I think the former top 5 pick who wants the contract of a former top 5 pick, because he wants that contract, he's not worth it. If he were willing to sign a very cheap veteran deal, then yeah, sure, why not? But he's better off their roster. Hopefully they can trade him for something. But I looking at this team, I think their upside is making the play be about 2024 and trying to really go all in on that.
So I wanted to throw this out here. So Jeff's saying this new McVay offense is being installed, maximize Baker, expect him to be the second best or even the best quarterback in the division this year. See, ideally, that's the type of offense that he can succeed in, right? I think that ultimately I just haven't seen it for too long with Baker. And maybe part of it's the injury with the shoulder. I think that's a big part of it. Maybe it's a confidence issue. If they instill confidence in him and the receiving core plays really well with Evans and Godwin, of course, which you expect, if the offensive line can hold up in pass blocking, we might be able to see 2020 Baker Mayfield show up, which would make him into that category of second best or even best, depending on who you ask. I just think it's a tough ask at this point for him. Like, if it happens, that is going to change the outlook of this team, because he even says here 6-win floor, 11-win ceiling. If everyone stays healthy and Baker plays like you said he would, yeah, they might be able to do that, because that would be the key, right? It's like if Baker can play like he did at his height in a McVay style offense, which is what he was running with Stefanski, and the defense stays completely healthy. Yeah, I mean, for sure, because again, their starting players on defense are fine. It's the fact that if anyone gets hurt, which in the NFL people get hurt, things could bottom out really quickly, especially in the secondary. Like that does scare me a little bit, because the starting secondary, like we've talked about, A1, but I don't know any of their backups as far as I know. Like, unless they sign somebody I'm mistaken, I don't remember any of their backup players right now.
Yeah. So I admire the confidence that leads to thinking of this team as a six win floor. I just want to Vegas has their over under at 6.5, which okay, if you think they have a 6-win floor, you should be betting every penny to your name on the over. And just to name some of the other teams that are also at a 6.5 over under, for context, Vegas doesn't really go under that number. That's the lowest number they're comfortably putting on bad teams.
It's hard to put it.
The other teams, the Houston Texans, the LA Rams,
Cardinals, I'm assuming, right?
The Cardinals are actually at 4.5, so they went really low on the Cardinals.
They are better, which is fair.
Yeah.
Kyler out,
but the other teams are the Raiders. Sorry, Dalton. The Commanders. That's it for 6.5. So they're not in good company.
No.
They're going to most likely win less than 6 games. That's Vegas is telling us like that 60% of the time they're winning 6 or less. So. I think their floor is closer to 2. I think they could really bottom out and have 2 wins. Like, I don't think that's absurd to think of this roster in that way.
Let me put it this way. If the pass rush falls apart, if the secondary gets injured at all, and Baker Mayfield plays like Baker Mayfield the past 2 years, this team could be bad. It's just, they're like, and bad. Like rivaling the Cardinals bad. All I'll say is a good way to know if this team is going to win 3 games is if we see Kyle Trask play at any point. That's how you'll know, because that means that they're really giving up, in my opinion. But no, I do think that their range of outcomes is still very high because of the fact they're a veteran team. They have veteran coaching. Like, there's always potential for teams like this that if they get on a run or if Baker Mayfield can play more like at least a starting caliber player, they could get out of that even 6-win territory. They really could. I'm not betting on it. I just can't do it at this point. I do have them at 5 wins is my projection for them. I think that they could win a few more than that, and they could also lose a few more than that, like you said, Tony. But what do you want to add to this, Dalton, here?
Yeah, so I think what you mentioned starting Kyle Trask, that's probably what they really should do. I think.
I mean, if you wanted to really just lean into it,
it's time to blow it up. I mean, if you start Baker, best case scenario, you win 8 games, maybe 9, and fall into a wild card spot and get absolutely annihilated in the first round. And then what? You're picking 19, 20. If you get that wild card spot, you're picking in the 20s. And now what? You're getting a year old. You're getting a year older. You're not adding a premium pick, and you're just descending further into mediocrity. Trade anyone over 30 that's worth a damn. Keep your younger guys and start Trask. And, maybe he surprises everybody. And then, then you're set at quarterback. And that's great. But more likely he's going to be terrible. And that's what you want. That's what you want. You want Caleb Williams. Blow it up. You sold out for a ring. You got it. Now it's time to blow it up.
I mean, I think that'd be the smarter thing, and I think that clearly, though, like you mentioned this when you were talking about Tony, is it doesn't seem like they really are 100% one way or the other. I do think more of their moves make me inclined to think that they want to compete. Also, Trask sucks. Correct, Jeff. I still remember that draft. I'll talk about him for a second since you brought up Dalton. I don't know this for sure, okay, and I really hesitate to say this because, again, I have not ever played even the position, let alone played football in a very long time because, I've been out of high school for quite some time. I think if you gave me like a couple weeks, I might be able to throw the ball farther down the field than Kyle Trask. Now, would I throw it accurately? No, but I probably could throw it farther than him. Like when I've seen him throw, I'm like, this guy, how is he out here? Like there's something to like, I'm not even talking about just like pure arm talent, but like he can't get the ball down the field. It's one of the weirder things. Like I remember watching some of his training camp from his rookie year. And I'm like, the ball is fluttering. And it's like 30 yards. And I'm like, holy crap. Like, how did this guy get drafted in the top, 60 or something like that? Or no, I think it might have been like late second round back. Point is, as much as I'd love to see that for the memes, I don't think they should do that just simply out of like respect for the sport. But that's beside the point. I think Baker will be able to be bad enough on his own, most likely. But again, I do think there's at least potential. You do have to worry about being like 8-9 and being like, what are we gonna do with this? Yeah. Like, there is that potential for sure. So, but in general, I think we all comfortably can say that we think the Bucs will be the worst team in the division, just naturally. Can they surprise? Like Jeff was talking about, there's a lot of reasons that you can point to and say that they can, but I'm going to bet on the teams that are younger, more up and coming, that have something to play for. Whereas I think the Bucs are kind of just trying to play out the string as best they can until they figure out what they want to do next. But we'll see with that. So, but that's everything with the NFC South. We'll definitely move on to, I believe we wanted to like South, East. We talked about.
Yeah, I think that makes
so
sense.
We'll be doing the AFC South next week here, which should be fun as well. A lot of talk about that division, some new quarterbacks, some new coaches. So we'll see how that goes. But that'll do it for us this week. Dalton, you haven't been on the show before, so if you want to shout out anything, go ahead.
Follow me on Twitter at Blackman_Dalton.
Yeah, on the screen here.
That's about it. Look for my stuff on ATB. Like do a lot of gambling content.
Yes, perfect.
Keep an eye out for that. And yeah, thanks for having me on the show, guys. It's been really fun.
Absolutely glad to have you on. So that'll do it for us this week. We'll see you guys next week. And if you are a fan of any of these teams, if we offended you, good. No, I'm just kidding. No, if you have anything you want to say, throw the comments in on YouTube. This will be up on YouTube. I actually didn't know for a while, Tony, if we actually had the recordings stay up on YouTube, but they do, luckily. So you can go back and watch this if you want. But we'll be having these. Maybe I might even be nice enough to have someone put a playlist of these ones specifically for the divisions once they're all done. We'll see. But
I don't want that because somebody's gonna just chop up all of my terribly aged takes, and then
this is part of it though, Tony. If we want to be here, that's part of the job. You got to be able to just be like ripped apart when you say something stupid that you didn't think.
I'm just waiting for the clip of me saying the Falcons are going 17-0,
and
then like in a previous
yeah.
episode, me saying that Ritter's gonna win an MVP.
Please.
Please understand the joke behind those things.
There's always context, but no, all right. But that'll do it for this week. We'll see you guys next week.